Let's go.
Thank you. Thank you, Wayne, for joining me today on the Emil podcast. It's an honor to have you here today because I've really become a very novice, amateur, interested party in jiu-jitsu over the past 6 months or so, and coming across yourself. In fact, for those who don't know, Wayne is one of the trainers at the local jiu-jitsu academy that I'm going to, and I just wanted to pick his brain about the process of going from a white belt to a black belt in jiu-jitsu, and how that looks like for just the average person, the person who probably knew nothing about jiu-jitsu before they got started and then progressed through the whole process of learning a new martial art. So that's why I've got Wayne Spence joining me today. Wayne, you described yourself as nothing special, just an ordinary guy before we started recording, and that's humble, but it's not true. You've progressed all the way from a white belt to a black belt in the span of 9 years. I've learned a hell of a lot from you, and I do appreciate you coming on board today and sharing your valuable time with me today. Thank you, Wayne.
Thanks for having me, Emil. So I don't know where you want me to start, but I suppose I'll talk about when I first got into jiu-jitsu. I started just after my daughter was born doing some MMA training, and that was mainly kickboxing, but a little bit of submission grappling as well. And I just fell in love with the whole grappling aspect of it. So for a couple of years, I did a little bit of no-gi, and then I took a year off with a couple of little injuries and stuff like that. And in about 2014, I found this little gym in Cranbourne that had a jiu-jitsu program upstairs. So I went and checked it out, walked in thinking I knew a little bit about jiu-jitsu, and just got my ass handed to me by like a 16-year-old blue belt. So it was awesome, but it sucked at the same time. But
can I just stop you there just very briefly, because that's so many people's stories that I've heard.
I was just about to say that, yeah.
they come in, they're like, oh, I know this. And then someone tiny, who's like, oh, I can beat this guy. Nah, their ass is handed to them. But please continue. Time. That's really cool.
Well, yeah, that's what I was about to say. Like over the journey, I've sort of discovered that that's a very common thread in jiu-jitsu. People come in, and I've always said there's two things happen when you start jiu-jitsu. You get your ass kicked, and you either go, okay, I need to learn, I'll stay and learn, or you'll crack it and leave. And I think that's how over the years you managed to weed out the good people and the people that aren't suited to jiu-jitsu, because everyone's going to get beaten up doing jiu-jitsu. That's just how it goes.
That's a really good point to play. It shows a little bit of a person's personal makeup, psychological makeup, as they come into the academy. From my end, as a psychotherapist, I love to understand the psychology of why a person is the way that they are. But I hear this all the time, listening to podcasts, speaking with people, and learning a little bit more about jiu-jitsu, and then also getting my ass handed to me so many times by teenagers. And I'm in my 30s, and then someone's half my age and can submit me. It's a real call to the ego. And I hear that all the time, that you've got to get past that ego centrism that people get into. Can you tell us a little bit about that? What was it like for you? Actually, take us a step further back. Did you know much about jiu-jitsu at all before you started?
Only what I'd watched on like the UFC and stuff like that. So before my daughter was born, I was a bit overweight. I used to play basketball fairly competitively, and I hadn't played basketball for probably 5 years. So I let myself go a bit. I didn't want to go back to basketball. And so I just thought, yeah, I'll give this a go. First class in was great. Like I had a really good kickboxing coach. And so I fell in love with that. And then when the grappling started, obviously, I fell in love with that as well. But I think a lot of people get into jiu-jitsu like that. they watch some UFC, or, you know, no one's sort of in Australia, especially 10 years ago. I think like UFC was probably, or MMA in general, was probably the only avenue for people to discover what jiu-jitsu was in the first place. And obviously that's evolved a lot over the last 10 years. Now we've got professional grappling tournaments, you know, ADCC is massive now. It's really blown up in Australia. But, you know, 10, 15, 20 years ago, the only jiu-jitsu myself and my friends saw was on the UFC. So that's pretty much how I got into it in the first place. And then it just evolved from there.
Fair enough. And when you see Hoist Gracie back in the 90s jump onto and just back those days, they had the gi, which for those who are not familiar with the terminology, it's just like the uniform or the that people wear in jiu-jitsu wear, that's called a gi. They used to wear gis in the, I don't think they had the octagon back then, but they had, maybe they did. I'm not in the, where they would grapple, and a person would go in with their bare hands with the gi, and then they'd fight someone who's got gloves and who's a kickboxer or just a boxer. And Hoist Gracie would, at least for the first few times, he would submit pretty much everyone until people started cluing on a little bit more about jiu-jitsu, and that's where it kind of evolved from there, a little bit of the history around that one. How early on did you get into the UFC or learning about the UFC here in Australia?
It was probably around, I think it was around 2000. I'd gone up to the Sydney Olympics with my wife, and her auntie lived in like a little seaside place called Port Stephens. And I remember I walked through the shops and they had the VHS from UFC 1 and 2 and 4 or something, and they were on sale. And I'm just like, oh yeah, fighting, that's pretty cool. And I put that on, and yeah, same deal. I watched it, just went, wow, like this is insane. And so it just sort of went from there.
Yeah, and you were interested when you got into it yourself. You were more interested in no-gi, so without the uniform, because it fit better into the mixed martial arts side of things.
Correct. Yeah, that's it. They didn't even have gi classes where I trained. It was just, we had a kickboxing class, we had a grappling class, and then we had like a mixed class. And I remember the first jiu-jitsu tournament that I did with a friend, we went and bought our own gis about a week before, and I bought some big judo gi because I didn't even know what gi I had to buy. And we just went out the back of the MMA gym and just like beat each other up for like a couple of hours before that weekend. And then we went and did a tournament. That was the first tournament both of us did. So, and now he's nearly a black belt and I am a black belt. So that's, you know, that's pretty much how that started too.
Fair enough. So walk us through going into the gym the first time around. Do you remember the first few classes? Do you remember starting off? Can you walk us through that experience?
I actually think that going to a gym, like whether it be kickboxing, jiu-jitsu, karate, anything, boxing, anything that's going to put you in any kind of stressful situation or, you know, combat situation, I think that first step in just even ringing up and going to the gym for a class, that's probably the biggest decision that people will make in terms of their journey. Because it is daunting. You know, I went into my first kickboxing class overweight, out of shape, you know, thought I could fight, found out very quickly that I couldn't, because as soon as you put the gloves on and you're sparring with people, there's, you know, and that's what's good about combat sports. Like there's nowhere to hide. You will get exposed. So you need to be ready to learn, or you're going to get into a lot of trouble. And so, yeah, I think just that first class, I went in there, I was very daunted, but as I started, you know, with the drills and all that sort of stuff, and I found out that I could pick it up fairly quickly, I had a ball. I absolutely loved it. But as I said before, some people don't. Some people go in thinking that it's going to go one way and it goes another way, and their ego can't handle that, and they go and do something else.
So the process of going in there and knowing that, all right, well, this is for me, this is something that I can get into, after having your ass handed to you, or after being submitted for a whole 5, 6, 8 minutes straight by someone who knows their stuff, I just want to affirm how much of a psychological experience that is for a person to say, this is something that I continuously falter at and I want to get better at. That switch over is really important. Do you remember whether it was an evolution or whether there was a moment where you're like, oh, I need to make a change because I don't know what I'm doing and I want to get to know what I'm doing? Was there a moment for you, or a few moments for you that you remember that happening as a white belt?
To be honest, there's moments where I remember that happening as a white belt, a blue belt, a purple belt, a brown belt, and now a black belt. Like that is something that will follow you throughout your whole jiu-jitsu journey, because it's like that. You get to white belt, someone beats you up, you go, okay, now what do I need to do? You figure out what to do. That's awesome. And then you go roll with a blue belt. And then the blue belt tools you up. You spend a few months or a few years learning how to handle the blue belt, and then you roll the purple belt. And every time, and it can be other blue belts, it can be other purple belts, it can be someone from another gym comes in, they've got a different game and they show you something that you're not good at. And it's that constant psychological struggle of, is this the highest point that I'm at now? Am I going to get better, or do I knuckle down, try and figure it out, move to the next step? And it's something you have to revisit throughout the whole jiu-jitsu journey, I think. So I think you do have your first moment with that as a white belt, and that's kind of the make or break moment, but it doesn't stop there. Like, you are constantly being reminded that you're not as good as you may think you are. And it's a sort of a hard mindset to adopt, but once you adopt it, it's really beneficial. Like that constant just drive to learn the next thing and learn the next thing and learn the next thing. And the thing is, with jiu-jitsu, you're never going to learn everything. It's too wide. It's too great. So what you need to do is learn what works for you and then get really, really good at doing that. But yeah, there's been many times I've driven home from training, even been tapped by a lower belt, and just say, what am I doing? Like, why can't I get past this block? But I suppose coming from like a competitive basketball background, I was very stubborn when I started jiu-jitsu. Like, I didn't want anyone to get the better of me. But it does humble you. And then you sort of, instead of saying, I don't want to get better so I can beat this person up, you start to realize that it's more of an internal thing. And you think, I want to get better because I want to get better. It's got nothing to do with the people that are beating me week in, week out. So yeah. So to answer your question, it's an ongoing process, and it crops up a lot.
How important is it, Wayne, for a person to be set aside people who are the same belt, the same stripe on the same belt, and then higher belts, and then exceedingly higher belts, like a white belt going up against a brown belt, for example, or a black belt? How important do you think this is for the training atmosphere?
Oh, it's super important. But I always say to the guys at the gym, you have to set yourself mini goals, and B, they have to be realistic mini goals. Okay. So for example, when I was a blue belt, I had a training partner that used to triangle me all the time. And I'm like, I have to stop getting triangled by this guy. So when we sparred, like, I'd get to training and go, right, tonight, I'm not going to get triangled. And so I would put myself in a position where he could shoot his triangle on me, and I would try and defend it or get out of it. And that didn't work straight away. For weeks and weeks, I'd go home, I got triangled again. But then when I finally figured out how to defend against his triangle and his setups, now no one triangles me. You know what I mean? So it's just setting those little mini goals to work on, and to not get disheartened when they don't work straight away, but also to not go too far the other way and say, oh, tonight no one's going to tap me, or tonight I'm going to pass my coach's guard. You're just setting yourself up for failure. So it's about sort of keeping your goals in perspective. And that way, when you are a white belt and you do roll with a brown belt, you can say, all right, I might get tapped. This might happen. I'm going to try this sweep that I've been working on, or I'm going to try to retain my guard if he tries to pass my guard. And if you just set yourself those mini goals, I think jiu-jitsu becomes much more enjoyable, and you start to build in your confidence because you are progressing. It might be tiny steps, but you're still progressing. So
it's a really important point to make, Wayne, because it reminds me of a podcast episode on the Lex Friedman podcast where he interviewed John Danaher. For those who aren't aware of John Danaher, well, I'm sure I'm pronouncing the name okay.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, he's the coach of some of the best world champions in jiu-jitsu, Nogi Gi, in New Zealand, born, migrated to New York, and now I think is in Austin, Texas. But he had him on the podcast for about 4 hours having a chat about the ADCC. Is that it? Yes,
That's it.
ADCC. So jiu-jitsu competitions, and also how he trains his people. And one of the things that he'd mentioned was, if a white belt wants to get better at jiu-jitsu, at their own game, is number one, you always have to have something to do, something that you want to set for yourself, that lesson, before you go into it. And you've just reflected that exactly the same way. You want to have those mini goals and make sure that they're realistic. And what I would ask around that would be, if a person set those mini goals and they've set them out, they think it's realistic, and then they get shown, everything that I'm doing is still not working. What's their next step? What kind of, how do they break those goals down to a point that they can adequately say, this is the best goal for me right now?
Probably two things. The first thing, I would get them to talk to their instructor or to the higher belt that they're rolling with and just say, look, what am I doing wrong? Can you give me tips? Can you show me a position where I can work on, and all that sort of stuff. Another thing that happens often in jiu-jitsu is that people say you're a blue belt or a purple belt. You'll get shown something and you could be good at it, but you fall into the trap of thinking that that's going to work on a brown belt or a black belt, and it's never the case. So I would always say, like, if you are really concentrating on like a specific thing, use the higher belts for questions and tips, and use the lower belts or the less experienced people in the gym to work on it, to practice it. I do a lot of privates with my head coach, Junior, and I always sort of joke when the session's over, I'm like, I'm going to go back and do that on the white belts, because I know I'll be able to do it on the white belts, no problem. And he turned around to me one day and he said, that's the game. That's what you do. You take what you know, you practice. When you can do it on this person, you move up to the next person, you move up to the next person. But sometimes it's crazy to think that I'm just going to go into the gym, roll with our brown belts or other black belts and rip off the same thing. So, and that's the frustrating thing about when you do start jiu-jitsu, is that you are that guy. You are the guy that everyone will practice their stuff on because you don't know anything. So I suppose at the start, it's just about perseverance and knowing that one day you'll be, it's the food chain of jiu-jitsu. You're going to move up it. The more often you go, the quicker you'll move up the food chain. So
it sounds like it's almost a breaking experience for someone, that you break them into the person that they need to be. So as a white belt, you're being experimented on by everybody. I remember going into it. One of the things that I'm that I'm told a lot of white belts do, including myself, and when I first started, is you just go spastic. You just go mental. You jump into it, and you're doing. Or at least me, I was relatively flexible, so I would do like a flip over someone, holding them, and then the next day, I'm like, my back is killing me. My everything's bruised and hurt. I'm like, okay, I can't do that anymore. But there's so much energy there in the first place, and it's half the thing is you just want to be alive. You just want to keep keep
moving.
alive and
Yep.
keep moving. In these situations, so a white belt, particularly coming in, they're getting submitted over and over and over again. I hear you say that it's part of the process to say this is what we're all about, and there are ways out of this if you want to learn. So if I'm learning one particular technique, and then I try it on a higher belt, you're right, it just doesn't work, but it works on people who are the same belt as me, or the same stripe, or a little bit less, who don't know. As you progress through your journey now as a black belt, how difficult is it for you to submit, say you're rolling with another black belt, and then you're using all your skills up until now? There's also degrees of black belts. At what point do you get good enough to say this is going to work on this person? The confidence that goes along with that, I guess, is what I'm asking you. How long does it take, or what does it take to have that confidence?
I think, as far as with black belts, because I'm still a very fresh black belt, I would be confident enough to, I don't think I'd be confident enough to say that I could submit black belts like regularly. But again, that's part of the game too. Now that I'm a new black belt, I'm effectively a white belt again to all the other black belts that are higher than me. You know what I mean? And the gap, people forget that it took me nine years nearly to get from white belt to black belt. And that's not too bad. Having said that, the gulf of experience between me and, say, a 4-stripe black belt like Coach Junior, that's, he's been a black belt for probably nearly 20 years. So wow. He's been a black belt longer than I've been training. So that shows you the massive gulf. So it's basically like once you hit black belt, you kind of unlock this new level that's just ridiculous. It's just infinite. So I would say at my brown belt level, I was fine rolling with other brown belts. I'd get submitted sometimes. I'd submit them sometimes. It's very back and forth. But black belts are a whole nother beast now. So, and I've only really rolled with Coach Junior, so I can't tell you much.
Yes. But it's a good place to reflect, because as each progression from a white belt to a blue belt, from blue belt to a purple belt to brown to black, there's always that transitional process to say, okay, well, have I earned my belt? Have I earned my stripe?
Yeah.
And I think that's what I'm curious about. How does one know that they've earned their stripe, that they've earned their belt?
There's a lot of internal conflict every time you get a new belt. You're always asking yourself, do I deserve it? The first time back in a gym is very scary, because you're always worried, I've got my blue belt. What if a white belt taps me now? That means my blue belt's useless. I'm a purple belt. What if a blue belt taps me? That means my purple belt's useless. But it's not the case. Getting a belt or a promotion in jiu-jitsu is not always about your jiu-jitsu. It factors in, your commitment to your team, how you help your teammates, the way you conduct yourself off the mat as well plays a big part. And as far as skill, you just have to trust your coach, I think. We were told very early on by Coach Junior that, and he's very stingy with his grading, because he said to us once, I want you guys to know that whatever belt you're on, you'll be able to go into any academy, roll with that level belt, and not be destroyed. You'll be able to hang with them. He's not saying that we'd go in and clean up, because we probably wouldn't, but we wouldn't get humiliated. And I thought that was a really good message. So whenever I've had a promotion or got a new belt, I sort of, in my mind, I never think I'm worthy of it. And I think that's a good and a bad thing. I think it's good because it pushes me to prove that I am worthy of the belt. And so I knuckle down, and then that helps me progress to the next level. But I also completely trust my coach. And I know that he wouldn't give me that promotion or that belt unless he was 100% sure that I deserved it. And because he has that 20-year gulf of experience at black belt, I trust him 100%.
Yeah, it's a good good place to reflect. Trust and humility is key here. When you're working towards a particular goal and you've set yourself a mark, then confidence stems not from how you feel about yourself, but from the skills that you possess.
That's right. And I often say to everyone that, you get your promotion on, say, the Saturday or Sunday, you go back to the gym on Monday, nothing's changed since the last time you trained. You just have a different color belt. Your jiu-jitsu is still, fairly similar to what it was on the Friday as it is to the Monday. So the goal shouldn't really be about the belt. It should be about the knowledge that's represented by that belt, because you wouldn't have the belt if you didn't have that knowledge of jiu-jitsu. And that's the important thing. I say to guys, don't worry about belts, worry about getting better at jiu-jitsu. And that's another thing that trips people up too. Some people get obsessed with belts. And it's like, oh, if I don't get my blue belt, I'm going to quit. Or, some people quit when they do get their blue belt. It's like, all right, I'm not going to get my purple belt. This will do. I know a bit about jiu-jitsu. I'm out the door. But yeah, you've just got to realize that the belt's just a symbol. It's just a symbol of what you know, what you can do. But it's definitely not a symbol that you know everything there is to know at that belt either. It's always learning.
You actually led quite beautifully into that next question I had, the significance of a belt, because the belt is a placeholder, right, of skill. That's generally what, at least how my novice mind conceptualizes it. I'm sure that some people may disagree with the way that I've termed that, but I guess what I would say is, if you feel like you need more, let's just say you're a white belt with no stripes and you want a stripe, and you've been at it for I don't know how long it usually takes. I've been told it takes something like 6 months to earn your first stripe, give or take. Say a person's been rolling for about 8 months, like, I should have that first stripe. Then it sounds like the person's focus is not as much on getting better as it is on just earning some sort of external validation of I'm okay.
Yeah, that's 100% true. And people shouldn't focus on it. We had a guy come into the gym last year, ex-UFC fighter, been training catch wrestling, I think, for probably 20 years. Never put a gi on in his life, never had a promotion, enters himself into the black belt open class in no gi grappling because he's so good and he just cleans house. And he came in and trained with us, and it was the best and worst training ever. Like, he smashed us all, but it was great because, again, puts you in your box of being humble. But it just goes to show, like, he never focused on any type of promotion. All he focused on for 20 years was being a better grappler. And, doesn't matter if you're a 4-stripe white belt, brown belt, 2-stripe. There's people out there that's not the focus. The focus is improving yourself, and that should be the focus. All the other things are just kind of like, as I said before, like a symbol of your progress. But only you will know the real progress that's happened within you, because I've always said jiu-jitsu is a great metaphor for life. It really is. And you usually find that the people that stick around at jiu-jitsu and get to those higher levels, that's reflected in their life outside of the gym.
I think that's a good metaphor to consider, because I look at, as a therapist, I look at jiu-jitsu as a therapeutic metaphor as well. So when I consider a person, the way that I explain it to people is, I put myself on the doorstep of death with the power to escape in a tap.
Yeah.
It's just, so with, for example, trauma therapy, a person who has experienced a significant amount of trauma, their control is taken away from them, and they feel like they're at the doorstep of death every single day almost, depending on what's going on that day. And what jiu-jitsu does is you voluntarily and consciously put yourself or allow somebody to put you into certain situations, or you come into the role knowing that that could happen. There's an option that could happen. But the difference there is that you've got the power to tap, to stop that. And where something becomes traumatic is, like, think about it this way: if a person got you into a submission and then you're tapped and he's still going at it, then that's going to be a whole new feeling.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So that's where I think about trauma. How do we get to the point where we can teach a person? So from my point of view as a therapist, how can I teach a person to create that tap in their own life and consciously put their selves in positions that are going to move them forward? That's a significant metaphor for
it is. And to be honest, I can't think of any other situation where you could do that. You know what I mean? I think that's where jiu-jitsu is unique. And it goes back to what I was saying before about setting those mini goals. Jiu-jitsu gives you the freedom to set those goals, because if they don't work, you're right, all you have to do is tap. You know, let's say I'm going to work on my single leg takedowns, and every time you go in on a single leg, someone gets you in a guillotine and rips your head off. You just stop, and then you go again, and you stop, and you go again, and stop. But you're right, that's not afforded to people who don't do jiu-jitsu. And it's kind of like not really a chicken or the egg thing, but I find that the problem solving that you experience in jiu-jitsu in those stressful situations equips you for problem solving that you'll need to have in the outside world. For example, since I can't remember the last time I got angry. And as a kid, as a teenager, I was a terror. I used to get so angry. And I think jiu-jitsu has given me those problem-solving skills to think, hey, anger is not an option. I can figure this out a different way. But with what you're saying with trauma therapy, it's kind of reverse. Like they don't have that. So I understand what you're saying. It would be great to find a way to teach someone that. But the trick is, can you get trauma patients to come to jiu-jitsu? You know what I mean?
Well, I've been trying to conceptualize how could I integrate jiu-jitsu from a therapeutic thing, and it's the thoughts are quite in their infancy right now, but I suspect that there could be some sort of integration there, because one of the things that people also notice within themselves when they've experienced a significant amount of trauma is that they can't trust their own bodies, because their bodies are constantly ripping the rug from underneath them. Their heart's just going all at it when they don't know why. And so to put yourself in a position where you're in someone else's guard and you've experienced something like sexual abuse or something.
It would be big trigger.
So the way that I've conceptualized it is exactly the way that you've mentioned. How can we create small, sustainable steps? So even just stepping onto the mat could be that one first thing, and just watching what's actually going on.
That's it. It's a good first step. We often do it with the kids. You know, some kids come in, they get separation anxiety as soon as they walk in the door. So we let the parents sit on the mat with them. And then the next class, the parents will sit off the mat and the kids will just sit and watch. And you just gradually, and you find that once they get into it, that's it. They're hooked. But those first steps are the hardest.
They are. And you mentioned that before, going into it and just taking that step, even before you've gone and started rolling or sat for a class or started to do some drills, that first step and saying, hey, I'm going to put myself out there. That's one thing that stands out. Let's progress a little bit in terms of from a white belt moving on to, I know we're talking about belts aren't as important, but the title of this episode is working from your white belt to your black belt. You know, what's the process? So I want to understand when we progress, and if we want to reconceptualize it to just talk about skills, what kind of skills are required for a person to progress through, say, a white belt to a blue belt, from a blue belt to a purple belt. So as they get better and better, what do people tend to notice in their own game, in their own jiu-jitsu game?
I would say that it's not so much about skill, it's about how you perform those skills. I often say to people who are new to the gym that as far as moves go, as far as your sweeps, your submission, like your basic sweeps, your basic submissions, all that sort of stuff, you will probably learn a great deal of everything you need to know at white belt. And then blue belt, you will refine it. And then purple, you'll refine it further. You know what I mean? So a triangle that a white belt hits and a triangle a black belt hits are only differentiated by the ease in which they're done. And as you progress further from white to blue to purple to brown to black, you learn to speed up your body but slow down your mind. So you see things coming. You learn to stop sweeps before they happen. You set up things when people don't expect you to set them up. So that's the big difference. As far as skill goes, I think with white belt, like personally, if you know your basic submissions, you know, your cross collar chokes, your arm bars, your triangles, Kimuras, Americanas, and you drill those so that you're at a stage where you can hit them from a number of positions, and you know, like 3 or 4 sweeps, a couple of takedowns, you've probably got enough knowledge to get to blue belt, but you'll spend those first 2 years getting really, really quick and really effective at hitting those. And that's when you'll progress to the blue belt level. And then at blue belt, they'll throw different things into the mix, like wrist locks. You know, that's a submission that you can't do at white belt that you can at blue. And so they'll throw that into the mix. And again, that's just a new thing that you have to practice, get good at, get quick at. And it isn't really until the end of blue belt when I think you start getting really fluent at what works for you. And then I've always been told purple belt is where you create your game. And that, in my case, that was true. A reason for that is I went into a no-gi grappling competition at purple belt where leg locks were allowed. And I'd never trained leg locks. I trained straight ankle locks and that sort of stuff, but not like intricate setups, you know, single leg X or anything like that. And the guy I fought, he pulled guard on me straight away. He grabbed my foot. I grabbed his foot. He knew what he was doing more than I did. And he popped my knee. And so my knee popped at that tournament. It wasn't super bad, but about 2 weeks later at training, I was trying to pull my leg out of a half guard, and my ACL just went bang. And so I had the scans, complete rupture of the ACL. I didn't opt for surgery because the other ligaments were still fairly intact. So I just did a bunch of rehab. But after that, I couldn't keep my guard closed anymore. People would open my guard like that. And so I was forced to adapt. And that's another thing that always comes up in jiu-jitsu. You will get hurt and you'll have to use your body to adapt to new things, new positions. So at purple belt, I started playing like a lot of half guard and a lot of open guard, and that became my game. And so I just spent the whole time focused on that. And I've seen a lot of people do the same thing. It's like white and blue, you focus on white belt, learning the moves, blue belt, getting really good at them. Purple belt is probably more using what you already know to start crafting your own style of jiu-jitsu. And then when you get to brown belt, that's when leg locks are legal. And then same as blue belt with the wrist locks, that opens up a new can of worms, and you probably spend your brown belt practicing your leg game. And then when all of that comes together, I think you're ready for your black belt. But having said that, my favorite moves are Das choke. I learned a Das choke when I did MMA. Okay, so I've been doing that.
So for those of us
all the way through.
Those of us who aren't aware of the Das choke, can you walk us through?
Yeah, so the Das choke that I like to hit is when I'm in somebody's half guard, when they're on bottom and I'm on top, and they get the underhook. And for anyone who knows jiu-jitsu, they know that the underhook is probably one of the most important things in jiu-jitsu. And I was lucky to be born with ridiculously long arms. So for me, if someone gets an underhook from that position, I'm able to get my arm underneath their armpit and onto the other side of their neck and lock up what's called a Das choke. So it's like a figure 4 choke, but you go under the armpit and over the neck. And then I just drop my weight and squeeze, and most of the time I get the choke. But I learned how to do that when I did MMA before I even put on a gi. So the difference in the actual choke between white and black belt, there's no difference. I've just learned to be much more effective at hitting it in that time.
Walk us through, Wayne. What are the main differences or the main considerations for someone who wants to specialize more in gi grappling versus no gi grappling? How are they really different? What are the misconceptions of either? What do people get wrong? What do people get right? What's the sense there?
I would say that it's very close-minded to think that one is better than the other. It does come down to personal preference, but I believe that they both complement each other. For example, I find that no gi is a lot quicker and a lot trickier because you don't have grips for control. So you have to be fast. But if you take that speed into the gi, you do surprise a lot of people. There's a lot of people that only train the gi, they're used to using their grips to set up, to do like slow passing, that kind of stuff. That's not to say there's not dynamic gi players out there, because there is. But most of the guys that I encounter, and myself included, jiu-jitsu is a hobby. You know, we're not professional athletes. We're not doing that. So I find the professional jiu-jitsu players, they're super fast anyway. But the difference between our no-gi guys and our gi guys, I would say, is the speed. Having said that, gi really gives you the chance to, I would say, I used to refer to it as training wheels, especially at white belt, because by being able to grip onto things, you're able to move your body in certain ways that you couldn't already. You know, you can use the grips for leverage. But once you get that muscle memory, you can transfer that into no-gi, and you can start using your hips and hitting those submissions without needing the grips. So they both really complement each other. So personally, I prefer no-gi for 2 reasons. One, I started doing no-gi, and 2, I had neck surgery about a year ago, and just the collar grips and getting pulled around by the neck in the gi is just, it's too hard for me at the moment. Hopefully down the track, you know, my neck will get a lot stronger and I can go back to it. But at the moment, I'm really only training gi with my coach in one-on-ones, and everything else I do is no gi. But there's definitely a place for both, and I would encourage anyone who does jiu-jitsu to do both. Yeah.
You mentioned the neck surgery
Mm-hmm.
that happened a year ago. Can you walk our audience through what happened there?
Yeah, it was probably when COVID hit, and we couldn't train. I started running a lot, and I noticed when I was running that I had a lot of tightness in like my upper back trap area. And over the course of 2020, I think it just got progressively worse. And I went everywhere. I went to chiro, went to physio, went to acupuncture, all that sort of stuff. And it just always felt like something was wrong. And then around the start of 2021, that's when it's called neuropathy, and it's basically nerve pain. So I had this chronic nerve pain all the way down my right shoulder into my hand. And then about a month or so after that started, my fingers went numb. So I finally got onto a really good surgeon who did all the tests and figured out that I had 2 discs in my neck that had completely ruptured, and one that was about to, and it had caused the vertebrae to pinch on a couple of nerves, and that's what caused the neuropathy and the numbness and all that sort of stuff. So we tried to fix it with a cortisone injection, which was absolutely horrible. I don't recommend that for anyone. I had to have it done under a CT scan. So they'd stick the needle in my neck. They'd go in to make sure it was on track. I'd come out, they'd push it in further, go back in. It went forever, and it didn't work. So when that didn't work, he just said, look, we've got to do surgery. So I've had 3 cervical discs replaced in the neck. I think it was the C3, C4, C5. And that part of my neck has been fused as well. So I basically have a big, thick block of bone in my neck, which kind of makes jiu-jitsu challenging at times, because there are certain positions that I can't move my head anymore. But having said that, I spent a lot of my rehab with my coach, figuring out ways to keep people away from my neck. And that's now my game. Like, I'm not even so much fussed about, submissions and all that sort of stuff. My goal now is like straight up defense, just stay away from my neck. Having said that, if I can sweep you and submit you, that keeps you away from my neck as well. So
that is true. Defense is as the saying goes, defense is the best offense. And
that's it.
And I noticed that as a fresh white belt here, who's only been doing jiu-jitsu at this point in time for 6 months at the recording of this episode, I am trying to take on the advice of many people who are much smarter and stronger than me that says, at white belt, focus on your defense as much as you can, because when you progress and then you don't have that defense, you're going to be playing a lot of catch up. It's an interesting one, but I'd like to go back to your neck surgery, your neck injury. Was that purely jiu-jitsu related, or was there something else that had happened?
I think it was a bit of both. I'm in my 40s now, so they did say around age 40, joints start to get a little bit worse for wear. There were a couple of times rolling where I got stacked pretty bad on my neck, and at the time it didn't, it hurt, but it didn't cause any, there was no alarm bells or anything like that. But that could have contributed to it. And I saw a few specialists along the way, and one said that he thought jiu-jitsu probably did cause it, but another one said he thought jiu-jitsu probably prolonged it from kicking in sooner, because he did, with all the tests he did, he said my neck was very strong, so that might have held it off for a little bit. And I'm 100% confident that my neck being the way it was strength wise really did help my recovery from it. So I could blame jiu-jitsu, but I don't want to blame jiu-jitsu. You know what I mean?
Were you ever, no, that I can definitely feel that. I wonder, were you ever told by any medical professional you need to stop doing jiu-jitsu?
Yes. Yeah, I was. But I don't listen.
Yeah. How did you feel?
That was heartbreaking. That was really scary. Even going into the surgery, I had no guarantees that I would ever do jiu-jitsu again. The surgeon was confident. Like he said, people usually bounce back. But the thing is, usually if you have one vertebrae fused, you've still got a little bit of movement in your neck. And because I had 3, he kind of said not a lot of people get back into, especially a combat sport environment with 3 vertebrae fused in their neck. But yeah, so going into surgery, I didn't know if I'd ever be on the mats again, to be honest. But it had got to the point where the pain was just unbearable, and I couldn't. I was on nerve blockers, I was on muscle relaxants, I was on painkillers, and I was just I don't want to be popping pills. So yeah, surgery was pretty much the only option. But yeah, having said that, the team that we have at the gym, they're amazing, and our coach Junior is amazing. So he really helped me sort of get back, as I said, stuff that's not going to put my neck in danger. And the guys at the gym are really good too. They know that my neck is pretty crook. So if they do happen to get a hold of it, they're not too rough with it. I tap early now. If I don't, if someone gets me in any kind of choke, I'm usually tapping before it's locked on, because I'd rather train the next day. There's been a couple of times where old Wayne comes out, white belt Wayne, and where I led with my head and just use my head for everything. But I get a quick reminder that doesn't work anymore. So I have to sort of back off. There's been a few times I've gone to hit a sweep where I've had to roll back on her and it's sort of near the head, and I'm no, I'll give up on that. So, but yeah, having said that, at white belt, we're all nuts. We're all crazy. And I think because when I started jiu-jitsu, the highest belt in the gym, apart from Coach Junior, was a blue belt. And so we've all sort of progressed together. And that's an advantage for you guys coming in now, because now you come in and we've got blue belts, we've got purple belts, we've got brown belts, we've got black belts. So you guys get the whole experience. Whereas us, we're just used to just beat the shit out of each other and hope for the best. So
That's the
you
way.
get you get a bit more guidance now, which is good.
We really do benefit in it. It's a really exciting prospect. I know that with the the leading with your head thing, I can definitely I can definitely connect with that. The thing that's got me more mindful, as you know, are my ears. So
oh yes, of course.
yeah. My ears, for those of you who don't know, my ears blew up. I started to get that whole cauliflower ear look, and I had to visit a physician who spent about 45 minutes draining and grabbing and pressing and pushing out and scalpeling and everything until it looks a lot better now. But it does change your game. Injury changes your game. And even if it's a very minor, like I've got a few scapes just on my fingers. I think that's what you call them, from just on the mat, and that changes your game. Just having that, the grips aren't there anymore, so you've got to work out something a little bit different. I wonder for you, Wayne, this is a little bit off center of what we've been talking about so far, but completely related to jiu-jitsu. Your work just like anybody else, and you come and you do jiu-jitsu, as you mentioned, as a hobby. What do people need to consider? People who have a full-time job, or people who work regularly and want to get into jiu-jitsu that just don't know much about it, and what can they expect?
It's a really good question, because we have, like, I'm fortunate that, I'm a school teacher. So throughout all of my injuries in jiu-jitsu, and I've had heaps, I've never had to miss work. Obviously I took time off with the surgery, but that happened during the very last lockdown. So I think I only ended up having like 2 weeks off work for that, which was good. But we have guys that are, tradies that need to use their bodies every day. And if they come into jiu-jitsu and get their knee popped or get their fingers broken or something like that, some of them can't work. And that's a massive issue. So if you are one of those people, I would say, like, you can still do jiu-jitsu, but just be very mindful of how hard you go at the start. All right, there's nothing wrong with going hard, but there's a difference between being hard and being reckless, I suppose. Kind of figure out how your body moves before you start throwing it around everywhere, is what I would say. Because we have had people break toes and break fingers and stuff like that, and they've had to take a few weeks off work. And for people that have ongoing jobs and that's fine, but for casual workers or contract workers and stuff like that, sometimes can cause a bit of trouble. Having said that, I would not let that dissuade you from doing jiu-jitsu. I think the benefits far outweigh the risks.
What would you say the main benefits have been for you over your time since starting? What have you benefited from jiu-jitsu?
I would say mentally, definitely mentally. It is a physical sport, but the biggest battle in jiu-jitsu is in your own head. And it's always like that. Yes, you're sparring against other people, but when you spar with other people, most of the time at the end, if you get tapped or you get swept or anything like that, you don't really think about, oh, they were really good. They did this, they did that. You're always thinking, what did I do wrong? I should have done this. I should have done that. And that's what you think about for the whole drive home, or, the whole next day at work or whenever. So it's kind of like the class doesn't end when the class ends, because the class continues in your brain. And one thing I've learned from jiu-jitsu over the years is just to slow down your thinking. Don't overthink things. The higher you get in jiu-jitsu, the more effortless it should be. And I think, again, sounds cliche, but it's a metaphor for your life. It really is. The more experience you get in life, the easier things seem. I often get told at work, like, you never get angry, you never freak out or anything like that. And I work in a primary school, so there's plenty of opportunities for people to freak out. And I just don't let it get to me, because I think there's nothing that life can do that hasn't happened to me on the mats. Like, the mat is, you survive that and you can handle most things. You really can. Especially like when we do our comp class, sometimes we do king of the mat, which is the most horrible thing ever. You know, you lie in the middle of the mat and every minute someone else comes in and they're fresh and you're not. And by the 6th, 7th, 8th minute, you just want to die. But you walk out of there and it's like, well, that's the worst thing that's going to happen to me today. And like everything else just seems like nothing. So yeah, I'd say the biggest benefit for me has been that mental clarity and being able to slow down my thinking and just being confident that I can problem solve a lot of things now. Whereas when I started, I probably couldn't.
That's a huge reflection, Wayne. And it's a reflection on what many people that I've spoken to, including myself, benefit from jiu-jitsu, that there is only so much you can think about when somebody's trying to choke you out or somebody's trying to twist your leg in some god awful way.
Yep.
You don't have the leisure to think about your bills that are due next day, or your although that's important to remember as well, but all those things that are just not worth your mental
That's right.
effort, all those things that you just overthink, it becomes so much less important. It's almost like when, I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but you come up in a plane, you're going up higher and higher and higher, and you start to see everything that's underneath you get smaller and smaller and smaller. And suddenly those problems tend to dissipate the further you are away from them. And we've got this for, say you come in, a class is around 1.5 to 2 hours, depending on probably that. And then you're training probably about 6 hours every single week of intense therapy, pretty much is how I conceptualize it. Physical therapy that has that mental application. So I can definitely see where you're coming from there.
With the plane analogy too, like it's a funny thing. I always get super nervous when I fly, and I always get super nervous before I compete. And it's the same feeling. Like when I'm waiting to compete, I'm always super nervous. I know I'm prepared. I know I've done everything right, but it's still just it's the anticipation or whatever it is. And on a plane, like when I'm sitting on the plane, just waiting for it to start moving, I have the same feeling. And when the plane takes off and it's in the air, I'm calm. And it's the same as competing. As soon as I step foot on that mat, I'm calm. And I think it comes down to the point that like things you can control, they take up a lot of your focus. You know, for example, at the competition, if I get too nervous, I can easily run out the door. You know, if I'm sitting on the plane and I think it's going to go final destination or something, I can get up and run off the plane. But once you're up in the air or you're on the mat or anything to that degree, it's out of your hands. It's out of your control. And so you can't focus on it. If you focus on things that you can't control, you're going to lose your mind. And with jiu-jitsu, I say to the guys, especially when they're like, how do I escape side control? How do I escape mount? I'm like, don't worry about escaping side control. Worry about improving your position by this much. That's something you can't control. Sometimes you can't control, like when you've got a 120 kilo dude on top of you, but you can make that little bit of space and then make that next little bit of space and then make that next little bit of space, and then you're good. So I would say like jiu-jitsu as well has taught me just to focus on things that matter and things that I can control at the time. And when it's out of your hands, you just let it go.
Wayne, out of curiosity, what are the biggest no-nos when you're starting jiu-jitsu, or when you've got it? What do you not do? What do you want to steer clear of?
You want to steer clear of, oh God, there's a lot of things you want to steer clear of. Number one, whatever gym you go to, check if it's not written on the wall, check with a higher belt, like what's the proper etiquette. Like at our gym, you know, we bow before we get on the mats. We shake hands of every belt in order. So whoever the highest belt is, you shake their hand first, you go all the way down the line. Obviously, you know, no shoes on the mat, all that sort of stuff. That's a bit of a given. As far as training goes, big no-nos would be, obviously, the first time you roll with someone, you don't know what to expect. You don't know if they're going to come at you really hard or if but I would say within the first minute or so of rolling with someone, you can kind of figure out like not what they want to get out of the roll, but like where their intentions are. You know, if they want to smash you, they'll smash you. If they want to take it easy, they'll take it easy. And I think a big no-no is like when someone's trying to take it easy and the other person's smashing them just to get taps. Or the other way around, if like a higher belt is rolling with a lower belt and the lower belt starts to go hard, I think it's good for the higher belt to match that intensity, you know, to give them sort of what they want. Don't tell people who you tapped or how many times you tapped them. That's a big no-no. No one gives a shit. Trust me, no one cares. And probably show up on time. That's a good one. Don't skip the warm-up until you're a purple belt. That's it. That's a joke. Don't skip the warm-up. What else? But just, I think the biggest no-no is to come in thinking you know everything, because you don't. And I think even if I went into another gym now as a black belt, I would not go in with anything close to that attitude. I'd be going in with the attitude of like, what can I learn? Who can I learn from? You know, we were doing takedowns one day and we've got a white belt at the gym. Obviously he's a blue belt now, but at the time he was a white belt. And he did this fancy little thing with his legs when he did the takedown so he could move into guard. I'd never seen it. I'm like, that's amazing. You know, so at the time I was a brown belt, he was a white belt. And I'm like, that's awesome. I'm going to do that. So, you know, some people would be like, oh, that doesn't work, or no, don't do that. Do it how I showed you. But if you're willing to learn, you're going to pick up everything. If you go into a gym with you know, I've watched UFC or I've watched ADCC and I know how to, you know, rear naked choke someone, I'll be fine. You're going to get a reality check pretty quick, I think.
So many questions I could bounce off that. One question that I would ask is, you're going to a jiu-jitsu academy, you're going there a few days a week. Outside of that, how important or unimportant is it? Say someone wants to improve their game, so they watch videos on YouTube from qualified trainers and say the Gracies or John Danaher or something else, and they're teaching things that are different to what you're learning on the mat. At what point is that all right, and at what point is that okay, maybe you should steer away from that?
We were told when we first started, Junior always said to us, don't watch YouTube. And I didn't until probably blue belt, maybe purple belt, and I started watching YouTube. And then about a month or so ago, I was looking at some stuff and I saw a video from 9 years ago, which was when I was a white belt. And I watched it and it was just bullshit. It was the worst. And now I realize that the reason he told us not to watch YouTube is because the content that was on there was not very good. It's a very different story these days. I think these days with jiu-jitsu being so popular, everyone can figure out who is a legit instructor and who's just someone who's trying to show off fancy moves for clicks. So I think when you get to the point in your jiu-jitsu where you are able to recognize what good jiu-jitsu looks like, there's nothing wrong with watching instructionals. There's nothing wrong with watching YouTube. Having said that, I probably wouldn't do it when you first start jiu-jitsu, because you're just going to cram yourself with too much information. And the reason that we teach the things we do teach is because they're the basics and they're tried and tested and they work. When you've got those down pat, then you're free to experiment with other things and incorporate them into your game. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, I use it like spelling. You know, you're not going to try and spell a 15-letter word before you can spell a 3-letter word, you know? So
it's fair enough. That's a good rule of thumb, actually. I do appreciate that. Wayne, is there something that you're itching to say, to teach, to something that we haven't touched on up until now, that you're like, hey, maybe people new to jiu-jitsu need to know this, or maybe people along in their journey need to know that? Anything that comes to mind?
I think the most important thing for me was whatever happens, just keep training. Even if you have to cut it down to once a week, even if you have to go and sit on the mat and watch, just because I found with the guys at the gym, just being around them makes me feel better. Like there's nights where I'm coaching and the numbers are even, so I don't go in and roll. And I get really shitty if I don't get to have a roll. But just being around them is enough. You know, I still go out of there with a smile on my face. And you just got to realize that, you know, everyone's doing jiu-jitsu to make themselves better people. So you should help them make themselves better people with whatever you do, whether it be answering questions, giving them a bit of a pep up, all that kind of thing. And so, yeah, I suppose what I would want to do, what I would want to get across the most is to just keep training. Whatever happens, just keep rocking up. As I said to you the other night, Emil, the difference between you and me is I started this 9 years ago and you started it 6 months ago. You know, I'm not a physical specimen. I'm not an elite athlete. I just kept showing up. And sometimes I think that Coach Junior might have just given me my black belt because he's sick of seeing me. He's just like, here, now you've got it. Leave me alone. But yeah, there's going to be times where you want to quit and it's hard, but you just got to push through. And sometimes you have a couple of weeks off training and you think, oh, this is it, I'm never going back. And again, it's just putting your foot through the door. Just go back to the gym, just get in there. Guys will always welcome you back. Guys will always help you out. And yeah, it's life-changing. It really is. I said that in my speech when I got my black belt, but it's genuinely life-changing. So
it's a beautiful place to begin to wind up, Wayne. You said it really, really well just before, that jiu-jitsu is not always about you and yourself getting better, but being there to help others in their journey as well. Even if you can't roll, you're helping others out by being there, by commenting, by conversating. It's a whole community approach, it feels. And I think this is what's so therapeutic about it for so many people. Not only are you pushing yourself to a point that is uncomfortable and you're succeeding and you're learning this in a 1% each day sort of way, you're also creating a community of people, a community of like-minded people who want to get better, and surrounding yourself with people who want to better themselves. That's a really important place to be, because there's so many people, so many naysayers out there, so many people who want to bring others down, but going into and surrounding oneself with those who also want to build themselves up, that's a good place to consider.
And I think also what people need to realize in jiu-jitsu and in life is that the more you do help people, the more you do better yourself anyway. You know what I mean? I say, and it's written on the wall at the gym, you know, don't hurt your training partners. Your training partners are there to make you better. Because if you make them better, then you have to get better yourself. You know, we've got a few blue belts at the gym now, and I feel stupid for teaching them half the stuff they know, because now they're hitting it on me. And I'm like, great, you know, they're getting me with my own stuff. Now I have to figure out a way to stop that. And when I figure out a way to stop that, then they're going to have to figure out a way to get around that. And then we just constantly do this until we're all at like a high level. And that's the game.
You're constantly building each other up. You're making someone better, while at the same, and then by making them better, they're making you better, because
Correct.
Then you have to move forward. That's a really good point. It's a really good point. Wayne, I appreciate your generosity in your time, in yourself, just being able to be on the mats at the gym, at the academy, and being able to teach us the way that we need to be taught. So I look forward to continuing the process with you, and we'll keep this process going. Thank you so much for coming on board. If anybody wanted to find out more about yourself or about the academy or about anything, where could they go?
You can go to graciebjj.com.au. That's our Pakenham and Cranbourne website, or you can look up Loyalty Jiu-Jitsu Academy on the Facebook, or you can come into the gym. So we're at 11A Whitfield Boulevard, Cranbourne West. So drop in, you'll have fun.
All right, beautiful. Thank you very much, Wayne. And thanks, I think we'll end it there.